This means real U.S. tax receipts will decline this decade at the same time as 1.5 to 2 million Americans apply for Social Security each year, compared to only 500,000 per year last decade. Even seniors who were smart enough to save a lot of money for retirement and attempt to live off the interest they collect and not to rely on government entitlements may soon find out that they can't afford retirement no matter how much money they have. A senior citizen with an account at Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, or Wells Fargo will now need to have $100 million on deposit just to earn $50,000 per year in retirement interest income.
People look at interest rates from the perspective of the borrower. We all want low interest rates because it helps the borrower. But what about the lender? What about the saver? These guys are getting destroyed in this relationship. You can't have an economy that doesn't reward savings, because you have to have savings. That's where economic growth comes from. That's where capital investment comes from. And until we're able to raise interest rates, we can never have a real economy.
Most economists believe hyperinflation can't happen in the U.S. because rising interest rates will put a stop to inflation. Although a record high federal funds rate in 1980 of 20% was able to prevent hyperinflation, our national debt back then was only $909 billion, or 33% of GDP. Today, our national debt is more than 14 times larger and about 91% of GDP, and that's not including our Fannie-Freddie debts and unfunded liabilities.
Hyperinflation, or a massive devaluation of the dollar, is now unavoidable. We have passed the point of no return. If interest rates stay low and they continue stimulating the economy to try to pretend that things are okay, to try to pretend there's an actual recovery taking root, we will continue to hyperinflate our currency. Now, if they try to contract the currency and raise interest rates, as we already know, our countrymen are dependent on easy money. They're dependent on credit. They're continuing to use their credit cards. They're continuing to borrow for houses, borrow for cars, borrow for anything we consume. Once they raise interest rates, those payments will simply become too much, because we already know that we are exporting our great jobs overseas. So the people we have left in the United States will not be able to afford these higher payments.
In March, U.S. interest payments on our national debt were only $20.8 billion, due to the record low interest rates on our total marketable debt of only 2.5%. Only 3 years earlier, in March of 2007, the interest rate on our total marketable debt was 5%. If the Federal Reserve begins raising interest rates in 2010, by 2011, we could see our marketable debt interest rate rise back up to 5%. This would mean annual interest payments on our debt of over $500 billion, or 23% of projected tax receipts. The White House budget doesn't project for interest payments on our national debt to break the $500 billion mark until fiscal year 2014. We find it shocking that the White House is projecting an interest rate on our debt in 2014 of only 4%. It will be impossible to hold interest rates at artificially low levels for so long. By 2014, we could be looking at interest rates of 10% or higher, with interest payments on our national debt reaching $1.5 trillion, or 43% of projected tax receipts. In February, Obama signed an executive order to create the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, with a mission to propose recommendations designed to balance the budget, excluding interest payments on the debt by 2015. By signing this order, Obama has created a new definition of a balanced budget as to not include interest payments. NIA believes this order serves as an admission that it will be impossible for the U.S. to ever have a real balanced budget again.
I mean, we're miles away from this explosion of inflation.
Well,
years away.
The hope is that we can start growing again, start generating tax revenue again, and grow our way out of this. Unfortunately,
we cannot grow our way out of a $14 trillion debt that grows $1 trillion a year.
Well, grow our way out from the point of view of sustaining it for further. Sustaining it for further.
With no hope for our debt to ever be paid back, or our budget to ever be balanced, the question becomes, what policy will the government implement to prepare for the coming crisis, and what policies will be implemented once hyperinflation arrives? Hidden in the recently passed $17.5 billion Hiring Incentives to Restore Employment Act is a provision known as Foreign Account Tax Compliance. This provision requires that foreign banks and financial institutions disclose the full details of American account holders to the IRS and to withhold 30% of all outgoing capital flows into those accounts if the IRS deems those account holders recalcitrant. We consider this to be the beginning of capital controls. It wouldn't surprise us if U.S. citizens are soon forced to invest their savings into U.S. treasuries. It also wouldn't surprise us if when food inflation begins to run out of control, the government implements price controls like Zimbabwe that lead to empty store shelves. It's no coincidence that the U.S. states with the lowest levels of unemployment are North Dakota at 4%, followed by South Dakota and Nebraska at 4.8%. These states are farming states, and no matter how bad things get in the U.S., Americans will need to eat. Our country needs to go back to its roots if we want to survive hyperinflation. During the Great Depression, 27% of those employed in the U.S. worked on farms. Today, less than 2% of U.S. workers work on farms, and agriculture makes up less than 1% of our GDP. On October 30th, 2009, NIA released an article predicting that inflation would appear next in food and agriculture. Since then, wholesale food prices have risen 6 months in a row. Wholesale food prices rose 2.4% during the month of March, the largest monthly increase in over 26 years. Some of the startling food price increases on a year-over-year basis include fresh and dry vegetables up 56.1%, fresh fruits and melons up 28.8%, eggs for fresh use up 33.6%, pork up 19.1%, beef and veal up 10.7%, and dairy products up 9.7%.
Right now there are food riots going on in India. They keep talking about this great economic miracle that's going on there. I believe over half the people are living on $2 a day, and inflation is eating away that $2 very quickly. And you're going to start seeing the same thing happening around the world, where the values of the currency decline. There'll probably be enough food, but there won't be enough money to buy it. And that's where you're going to start seeing the riots happen. More of an economic result than an environmental one. And it won't only be food riots, it'll be tax riots. It'll be riots against big governments clamping down on people. The Second American Revolution has begun.
Many NIA members ask us about the U.S. gold reserves of 8,133.5 tons, and if our gold reserves will be enough to help our country survive hyperinflation. Although many people claim our gold reserves were audited in 2005, the auditor, KPMG, claims to have only audited the Mint's fiscal year 2005 financial statements, and they never saw any physical gold or even went to Fort Knox. The last real audit of the U.S. gold reserves took place in 1954.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
If the U.S. defaulted on its gold obligations when it ended the gold standard in 1971, how do we know our gold reserves of 8,133.5 tons still exist? If they do, why aren't they audited on an annual basis like the assets of publicly traded companies? Assuming that our gold reserves still exist at Fort Knox, the value of our gold reserves based on the current price of gold